I would say at this moment, my main concern is, or the thing that's kind of keeping me up at night, is the proliferation of automated decision systems in domains like far and wide that initially didn't have these kinds of automated decision systems, that didn't have learning systems embedded in them, but they're being marketed as solutions in carceral settings in ways that they hadn't been previously. And why this scares me is kind of two-pronged. The first is that that proliferation indicates a mass acceptance and acquiescence to these technologies. And that scares me, right? It's a shift in which we're entering into a moment where these solutions have been naturalized in settings, and they've been naturalized before we've had a chance to confront the problems with these solutions at a fundamental level. And the second is that oftentimes, as they're being proliferated into systems that are very, very federalized. They're existing in a local scale, and there's very little oversight. And so they're being marketed as solutions to problems that are invariably going to affect marginalized communities in ways that have very little oversight. And similar to how predictive policing was marketed, for instance, from large scale to local municipal policing departments, these kind of automated decision systems are being proliferated in prisons, they're being proliferated in detention centers, they're being proliferated throughout settings where marginalized communities are having to confront the bureaucratic state, and the devastating impacts of that are things that we're not going to know for decades to come, I think.
Are so many ways these days that we can be surveilled by both government and corporations. And I think my biggest fear is actually that with all the surveillance, that the world will turn into a darker place where every action we take, everything we say is all documented and logged. And then that will stifle, it'll cause people to self-censor, and it will not really bring about the foundations of our country the way that they were, the ideals that I was taught that we were supposed to have. And I know we've had trouble in the past meeting those ideals, but still freedom of speech and association, and we have Fourth Amendment rights that prevent us from being searched illegally. I think too, as people know that everything's being watched and they self-censor, we could actually lose the opportunity to solve some of our biggest problems just because people are afraid to speak out and give and share their ideas. Also, I think a lot of the tracking that is done for punitive reasons. We basically, instead of helping people, like solving what problems they have, we're punishing them and then making their situations even more challenging. So I would like us to focus on making a better world instead of a surveillance state.
I will say, like, echo what Sarah and Chris have said. There's just so many elements of surveillance that are so nefarious. And I feel like it's like an everyday event that we see something new that's shocking in the world as it relates to carceral punishment and surveillance. I think the invitation to me was kind of to speak around what's sort of hitting us in the immigrant rights movement. So I do want to just quickly name the insidious role of what we call data brokers. They have a huge role now in immigration enforcement, and frankly, other devastating sectors like policing, electoral politics, economic consequences, and virtually escape any sort of local and federal government accountability. And so for the folks who are on the call who are new to this like tech surveillance lingo, data brokers are what we call like data merchants or data middlemen, salesmen, who are buying data, especially from local government like Portland and other tech companies. We're talking driver license data, your internet service data, your phone bills, your utility bills, your mobile location data, and reselling and repackaging that data from anything from electoral disinformation campaigns to what we really care about at Just Futures, which is ICE and Immigration Customs Enforcement, to locate individuals, detain them. So these are companies like LexisNexis, Thomson Reuters, and also consumer reporting companies like Equifax, who directly have contracts to sell their data to ICE. And I think we believe that these entities really pose a threat to tech accountability, because I think in past iterations of this conversation around immigrant rights, we've always focused on getting legislation or campaigns to stop the actual local agency from sharing their data directly to ICE. So we're talking, the Department of Education, local public schools, jail settings where officers or agents are directly calling ICE. But now we kind of have no idea, because of these data brokers sometimes, where this data is coming from that locates individuals. They're finding their ways to these data platforms like Thomson Reuters and LexisNexis because residents' data is being bought and sold so frequently, and because so many local governments are outsourcing so much of government services to these tech platforms, or outright selling that data to these third parties like LexisNexis, it's really hard for us to draft legislation. And so we should be really thinking about, okay, what is the regulation and accountability structure we really need to get these tech companies who kind of have like bought our data and monetized it.
Yeah. It's interesting you started off the science fiction question, which, as you noted, a lot of the authors, put us in this dystopian kind of context as they're, telling their story. I think my primary concern is pretty similar to what Chris voiced, is that at some point it's going to be too late to push back. I don't, I hide my tin hat. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I'm generally pretty pragmatic, but with the speed and just the scale of automation and modern computing power, at some point, when the machines are coding the machines themselves, it's going to be very hard to prevent a panopticon from truly existing. And, we all know that the dangers of surveillance, on that scale is that you basically cement the status quo in a place. There will be no new social norms evolving because we'll be too afraid to ever challenge or create a new social norm. I think my other primary concern is sort of a bunch of themes, and it's honestly, it's a failure of folks like myself in the advocacy community. 99% of my friends still ask me what the heck I do for a living, and it's all over my Facebook and everything else. Like, I put it out there, and it's just, there's this combination of apathy, of we'll trade privacy for convenience. We give all sorts of privacy, all sorts of data over for consumer apps that we use, and there is a benefit. Generally, it's a mutually agreeable transaction, but as Julie mentioned with data brokers, there's a lot of back-end damage we might not know about. Sort of related to that, one of my advisory members, Jumana Musa from NACDL, has this phrase, the scientific veneer of infallibility. She's a criminal defense lawyer. And, we're finding out that like bite marks and hair microscopy and DNA even, it's no longer as accurate as we thought it was. ShotSpotter and other things that are, predictive analytics, like we're taking away people's liberty. And we don't even know if this stuff is accurate, if it works. I think that's the other really big alarming trend. People hide behind trade secrets and so on. And we never even know if this tech is working. Universal mass surveillance system where you might always be getting watched, but you don't quite know if you're getting watched because it's all surrounding. And so it changes your behavior. You self-censor all the time. And I think, we've always had this tradition of, I have the right to be anonymous in public. Well, now with facial recognition and license plate readers and all sorts of other things, you've taken away my right to be essentially anonymous in public. It's making it technologically impossible to do that if I want to operate in a modern world. And that's a really big shift in our way of life, in our government, and certainly in the balance of power between the watcher and the watched.